Hey, what's going on everybody? Today I'm going to show you how to set up a Valheim Dedicated Server using Linux. Now I found this game a couple days ago and I've already dumped a ton of time into it. It is very addicting and I'm definitely addicted to it. So I figured I would show you guys how to set up your own dedicated server so you can play with your friends. Now the game does have its own kind of server system built into it, however it is kind of like a client-side hosted thing where if you're playing Valheim and you're hosting the server, people are only able to play in your world if you are playing in your world and online running it. So that's where dedicated servers come in, where you can kind of set them up, and if you have the ability to, run them 24/7 and you or your friends can connect to them whenever you want. Now this is part 2 in 2 videos that I am putting out on how to make one of these. The first video I did is how to set this server up using Windows. So if you are not running Linux, go ahead and check that video out. However, in this video I'm going to be using Ubuntu 20.04.2. Now I prefer Ubuntu just because that's what I'm used to, but the setup's going to be quite similar if you're using something different such as CentOS or Arch Linux. Now before we get started here, I am going to just show you the 2 guides that I referenced for this video. And that is the main SteamCMD guide from the Valve developer community. And this just goes through the various commands and how to set up SteamCMD. And the other guide that I used is actually a post from Silver Knight on the Steam forums. And this just goes through the various SteamCMD commands in order to install the Valheim Dedicated Server. Now this post is centered around the Windows installation, however these commands are the same for the Linux install because we're just installing SteamCMD, and the same commands you would use for SteamCMD on Windows still apply to SteamCMD on Linux. So without further ado, let's just jump into it. Now I'm assuming you already have a Linux machine set up. Personally I use virtual machines, and for this video I'm using VirtualBox. I am not going to go over how to set up VirtualBox or Linux on it, but I am assuming that this is a fresh install and you haven't really done anything else with it. So I'm just going to go ahead and open up a putty window so we can see this better. Alright, and we are in the server. Now, since we're assuming this is a brand new install of Linux, we're going to go ahead and do the default first steps for any Linux installation, and that is going to be a sudo apt get update. Oh, sudo apt update, my bad, I didn't put the dash in there for the apt-get. And once that is done, we'll go ahead and do a sudo apt upgrade, just to get the latest versions of everything on our machine. Alright, and now that we're up to date, the first thing we need to do is install SteamCMD. And if you need the guide, just Google SteamCMD installation, and I already showed you that guide earlier, but it's the one from the Valve developer community. Now, an important note on this is the 64-bit specific commands, and that is in the guide that's linked in the description, but more specifically the command to add i386 support. So if we just try to do sudo apt install SteamCMD, at least on this distribution, it's going to say that it has no installation candidate. And that is because we're using a 64-bit system and we have not yet added the i386 architecture to it. So in that guide, you'll see 4 commands, and that is sudo add apt repository multiverse. We can go ahead and use that command, however, every time I've tried it, it's already enabled for all sources. So you really don't need to use that. But the command that you do need to use is dpkg-add-architecture space i386, and this is what enables those i386 packages to be downloaded and ran on this machine. Now I think I kind of misspoke when I ran that command. If you can see all these errors that I just got, the command is sudo dpkg-add-architecture space i386, and you should get no output when you run that. My issue way back here is I didn't do the double dash to begin with, so that was my issue on that command. And after we have enabled that, we can go ahead and do another sudo apt update, since now we technically have more packages that we can download in our repository. We need to do another update. And after that is done, now we can do sudo apt install SteamCMD and say yes to the extra 22 megabytes. and click OK and agree to the license statement. Now, if you are looking at the Steam guide, it does say to use the apt install lib32gcc1 SteamCMD. You can use that. It is the same package. Because we enabled the i386 architecture, the regular apt install SteamCMD is going to download the same package. So those two commands are interchangeable. Now, once it's been installed, we need to issue the command to install the Valheim Dedicated Server. Now, there are two ways to do this. One of them is with a single command, and the other is just by using the SteamCMD console. And I'll go ahead and just show you both. And the first way I'm going to show you is just by using the SteamCMD console. So what we can do is just type in SteamCMD, and it's going to update SteamCMD before it actually runs for the first time. And once that is done, now we have a different prompt that just says Steam. So at this point we are in SteamCMD and we can issue our commands. And the first one we're going to want to do is log in as anonymous, and that is just log in anonymous. And it kind of broke up my input there, but there's the command that I just used, and it's already successfully logged on as anonymous. Now, for the Valheim server, you do not have to actually log in with your real Steam account. I know there are some servers that kind of require that. This is not one of them. You can just use anonymous and it'll work just fine. Now, the second command that we're going to use is to actually install the Valheim Dedicated Server. But there is one command that you might want to use first, and that is force underscore install underscore dir. And following that, we can specify where we want it to actually download these dedicated server files to. Now, what I like to do is actually put this in the home folder, because typically when I deploy a Valheim server, that's the only purpose of the machine. So I'm going to go ahead and force install directory to home, toasty, and then a new folder called SteamCMD under my home directory. Hit enter, and then now we can issue the command to actually install the files to that directory, and that is app underscore update, and the code for the Valheim Dedicated Server, which is 896660. And I'm going to go ahead and put the validate keyword at the end there as well, and hit enter, and now it is downloading all of these files for the actual dedicated server to that installed directory. Now, like I said, that force install directory command is optional. If you don't put that in, it's just going to put it under the default SteamCMD folder, and I'll show you where that's at once this is done downloading. It's totally up to you. I just like to put mine there in the home directory so it's right there when I'm ready to run it, but it's really just preference. Alright, now it says success. App 896660 is fully installed. So at this point we can exit out of SteamCMD, and we are back to our main prompt. Now, the other method that I was talking about is just a one command method to do all of that, and it's just by using a plus symbol to just force all of the commands through SteamCMD at the same time. And what that looks like is SteamCMD, and then you do plus login anonymous, which is the first command we typed in, then another space, and plus force underscore install underscore dir space, and then the directory that we set it up for, and then another plus app underscore update, the ID of the Valheim Dedicated Server, the validate keyword, then another plus, and exit. So if you look at this command, it's really everything that we already did. The only difference is that it's all on one line, and all we have to do is press enter, and it's going to go through all of them back to back to back, just as we already did manually. And you can see that that barely took any time because we've already done those commands, and it's already installed. So now that that is done, if we do a list, we can see there's our SteamCMD folder in the home directory that we forced it to go to. And if we change directory down to that folder and do another list, we can see all of our server files. Now, before we configure the server to go, I'm just going to show you how to get to the actual SteamCMD folder, and that is change directory, root, usr, games, and we'll go ahead and just go in there and do an ls, yep, SteamCMD, and I just tried to change the directory to the actual executable SteamCMD file. which isn't going to work. So if we didn't specify the force install directory, it would install the dedicated server files under this folder instead, which is where SteamCMD is installed to, USR games. Now let's go ahead, change directory, back to the home directory where our actual server files are. Go down into our SteamCMD folder and take a look at these files. Now, the only file that we're concerned with is this one called startserver.sh. So we're just going to open that with the text editor of your choosing. I like to use Nano, Vi or Vim works as well. To use Nano, we're just going to type in nano startserver.sh. And this is the contents of that file. Now, the sections that are showing up in yellow are the ones that need to be changed, or at least are recommended to be changed. And by yellow, I mean not the one on the echo line. It's this line that we are concerned with. This is the one that launches the server, and you can see it's going to launch it with the Valheim server program, and then you've got this name, port, world, and password configuration. And these are the ones that we are concerned with changing. This name, my server, is going to be how your server appears in the actual game's server browser. So name this whatever you want it to show up as. I'm going to name mine Toasties Server, and make sure to keep the quotations around that. And the next part is the port, and this is just the port that your game server is going to use for connections. This is a useful one to change if you're going to be running multiple servers on the same machine. Otherwise, you can just leave it at the default 2456. Now, there are a few kind of caveats with that. This is the port that we're going to use for port forwarding in the end, and it goes in twos, at least from what I've found. The server will use 2 ports, and that'll be 2456 and then the next one up. So 2456 and 2457 will actually be the 2 ports that we'll need to forward. And for any additional server that we add, we'll just use the next 2 ports. So if I wanted to set up another virtual machine with another Valheim server, I would start that one using 2458 and then forward 2458 and 2459, and so on and so forth if I need more than one Valheim server. But for this, we're just going to leave it at 2456, which is the default. Now, the world area is really, I mean, it doesn't matter that much. This is just going to be the name of whatever world. I don't believe that it has to do with the seed. Don't quote me on that. It could very well be the seed for the world, but I do know that if you're importing a world from another server to host it on this one, the name of that world will need to match on this line. But since we're creating a brand new one, this doesn't matter. I'm just going to name it Toasty World. And the password, you have to have one. The default is secret. If you want to leave it with default and just allow anybody to connect to it, that's fine. A lot of people know that the default password is secret. But if you want to lock it down and only give out the password to who you want, then go ahead and type in something different there. I'm just going to change it to password. Now, once this is done, let's go ahead and save this, which in Nano is Control X and then Y and Enter to overwrite that file. And at this point, we just need to launch that startup script, which is going to be sh startserver.sh. And this is going to do the initial startup of the server. And this could take anywhere from a few seconds to 10 minutes. Typically, your first time starting the server is going to take, at least for me, around 5 to 6 minutes to fully go through setting up. But each time you run it after that, it's going to take probably just a few seconds. And the command that we're looking for, well, not the command, but the output we're looking for is either something to do with dungeons or a connections message. And if you see this failed to initiate SDL thread priority manager, just don't worry about it. I'm not entirely sure what that has to do with, but I know that it doesn't really cause any issues. And here we go. We can see DungeonDB start. That is usually the second to the last command that shows up in the output. Sometimes the last one, which is like server is connected or something like that, sometimes that shows up, sometimes it doesn't. Usually if you see this DungeonDB start, then the server's probably running. So now we just need to forward the port that we specified in order for it to be publicly accessible. So let's get the IP address of the local machine. Now I already know mine because I SSH to it, but if you don't know yours, we're going to go ahead and suspend that process and put it in the background and run ifconfig and look for this IP address. Now, if this is the first time using ifconfig on this brand new install, you are going to have to do sudo apt install net-tools, not net-tools, net-tools, come on, net-tools, there we go, and I already have it. So we're going to take this IP address, 10.13.13.147, and forward it on our router. Now, this part of the setup is going to depend on what kind of router you have. If you don't know how to port forward for your specific router, look up the make and model of it, and there's probably a guide out there for how to enable port forwarding. But on mine, I'm using a Ubiquiti edge router, so I'm going to go to the firewall NAT tab, and I'm going to remove the previous Valheim rule that I already had in here, and I'm going to add a new one. And the port that we're going to forward is going to be 2456 through 2457. And we're going to forward that to this address of our virtual machine. So 13.147, 10.13.13.147. And we're going to put in the same port numbers for the forward to ports. And just give it a description of Valheim and apply. Now I'm just going to go back to the server and place that process in the foreground, and I'm actually going to restart it. Sometimes you need to restart it after port forwarding. Normally you don't have to, but you know, I've seen some weird stuff in my day, so we're gonna go ahead and just rerun this server command, which is sh start server.sh. Go ahead and run it, and this time it should only take a few seconds to get through all of these startup commands. And there we go, we can already see the dungeon DB, so we should be good to go. Now let's go ahead and open our Steam server browser. If you're not familiar with this window, it is in the view menu of Steam, and it is called servers. And we can sort by the Valheim game and look for our map, which we named in the configuration file Toasty's server. However, I am pretty sure that this is not going to show up. Your mileage may vary on this part. Typically when you host your own server out of your own home network, it really depends on your networking equipment whether or not you're even able to see it in the public browser yourself. However, your friends should be able to see it here. If it doesn't show up for you in the actual internet tab and all of the hosted servers, you can go to favorites and manually add it. I'm going to go ahead and clear these out because those were the ones I used for my Windows video. And we're going to add a server. Manually put in the IP 10.13.13.147 and the port number, so 2456, and add this address to favorites. Do a refresh, and we can see that it says not responding every time we refresh. If you get this, remove it, and this is the purpose of those two ports. And I'm honestly not sure why it does this, but if you run into that, just do 2457 instead of 2456 and add that one to favorites, and you can see it now shows up as Toasty server. So like I said, it should automatically show up as Toasty server in this list for everyone else except you, unless you're lucky enough to have one of those routers that Hairpin NAT actually works for, which is another topic. But from here, we can right click on it and connect to server, enter the password that we set in that configuration file, which I just set as password, and select our character, and it should automatically take us into that server. Go ahead and enter the password again, and we are now in our own dedicated server. Now, it is a little unfortunate that you have to kind of go into it through the servers menu that way. And it kind of sucks that it doesn't show up in the actual community list, at least most of the time when you make this. But that is the kind of the way around it, to directly connect to it by IP address. And usually every time I do it, it does use that second port number, the 2457 instead of 2456 for the local connection. No idea why that is, but that's just how I get it to work. Everybody else using this server, it should work as normal. It should show up in the list, and there really should be no issue with that side of it, as long as those ports are forwarded to the correct machine. And that's really all there is on getting a Valheim dedicated server set up using Linux. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Hopefully you learned something, and as always, happy networking.